Good morning and welcome to a jam-packed NBA strategy show. It's nice to stretch out and have more than one game on the slate to talk about, and plenty of ways, plenty of paths, plenty of avenues to make some money. And that's exactly what we are going to do. Yes, we, myself at Shander Show, Alex Baker, as you know him, Awesemo, of course, the boss in the house at Awesemo DFS on Twitter. And I'm sure you're following him because you see fresh off of another tournament. This time, what, clearing 100K on a soccer tournament? Everything you touch is gold, man.
Thanks, man. I gotta give Giovanni a ton of credit on that because I didn't know anything about the soccer matches yesterday. I just kind of took the projections on our site, and I made a rookie move by not late swapping off the guy that wasn't in the lineup, but then he subbed in because some other guy got injured, and he was the guy that had the huge game for me. So that might be the luckiest win I've ever had.
You know what? It might be, and probably is top three if you were to build your list, I'm sure. But it's also the best advertisement I think we could ever have for our site, right? It's like you, of all people, just blind faith follow our own projections here on the site and you clear money. I mean, is that not the best way to advertise what the hell we're doing here in its own right?
Yeah, I think you got a point there. That's what I was saying. They have a big soccer tournament. You don't need to know that much about soccer. You just need to, you leverage the resources.
Now, are you in anything else we should know about today? Blind, like a PGA final day, or are you back today on soccer, Alex?
I'm looking forward to. I did the soccer game, but I'm looking forward to another chance in NBA because last night I was really heavy on Zubats, and I was like, okay, he got in foul trouble in game two. In game three, he's not going to get in foul trouble. All they're going to need his size versus Gobert. And I'm so confident in this. I'm going off on a date with my fiance, and then 20 minutes before the game, they're like, Zubats isn't starting. They went with Morris as center versus Gobert. I'm like, wow, I can't change my lineups at all. I'm just kind of locked in, and it didn't go that well. So
Wait a second. See, we were on Live Before Lock last night, and Greg, you could just see it visibly how frustrated he was because for the first 40 minutes of the show, it was all about Zubac starting and then building around that theme of him starting. So, of course, he had to squirm, but at least we were on the air. We were doing the show. You're telling me that the fiance wouldn't give you 8 or 9 minutes at the table just to frantic? It's not like you're not going to win money. You're bringing money into the household.
Yeah, I mean it's easy as a one-off, but man, when you play NBA DFS every night, the significant others get frustrated. I'm sure that you guys watching have had that experience where it's like you're in the middle of something with the family, and then you get the news. It's like, oh, Kawhi Leonard has a migraine or something. It's like drop everything.
Exactly. Now, we do have something as far as that in a smaller standpoint to factor in. James Harden is out. He's not coming back. But there is the Jeff Green upgraded to questionable. And it's really the only injury to kind of factor in across the board on the slate. But as you know, whenever we have somebody coming back that's not full on, Donovan Mitchell type usage expected, at least, Jeff Green is really not going to do much, I would imagine, Alex, for himself, more so than just take minutes away from other people who we've kind of got used to sliding in at smaller cost and as far as, working them in lineups.
Yeah, I think Jeff Green's big news because they could really use him to man up with Giannis. So I expect if he's healthy, he's going to get a lot of run. I think he had a foot injury, so he might be on a minutes limit or something. But that definitely is a wrench in their rotation that we got to figure out.
So how do you approach, we have now second round, we're deeper into the playoffs and getting to that point where it's 1 to 2 game slate. So it's nice to take advantage of not everybody having the same 7 or 8, maybe 9 guys to choose from. We can stretch out a little bit. Are you looking at anything maybe specific today, or is there kind of a general strategy that you're looking to apply on these shorter slates in the playoffs?
Well, we got to do something a little bit different. So one thing I'm thinking about is in this second game, it starts like 5 hours after the first game, and it's an elimination game. So I feel like maybe Denver being down 0-3 really tries to shake it up and go with a different lineup. So I might try to save some roster spots to late swap around whatever we get there.
All right. So then that means as far as a shorter or I guess tighter window on the early game. And if that's the case, are you looking at taking advantage of some chalk opportunities just because you have smaller opportunities to roster guys in that first game? Or is there maybe a chance where you are looking for a guy who's got a high boom, but also could bust as well?
There's some really good plays in this first game that might be important to go for. Like well, we've seen that with Milwaukee, they got into this hole, and then last game they played all their guys that were key players, a lot more minutes. So if we see more of that, then the Bucks could look like pretty good values here.
All right, so we're going to dive into it and look specifically a couple of top guys here on the slate. Reminder as people are coming in, and already the love for Alex return to the NBA slate. You could see it piling up in the chat. So we don't ask for much, right? Just hit us up with a like and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Of course, that helps us out exponentially. And we see people popping in late. Hey, did Alex mention this about Bryn Forbes yet? Hit the notification bell so you're here on time and you don't need to pop in 40 minutes late and ask the crew or us if anybody hit on Bryn Forbes 2 minutes into the show. A lot of things as well. It's not just $29.95 across the board. As we keep telling you at Awesemo Plus, we do have some opportunities for the NBA. But look, the NBA is winding down. We only have a couple of really weeks to a month plus for the NBA playoffs, and then everything else turns to golf, baseball, a lot of and you'll be hearing from Alex a lot in the MLB world. So why not get ahead of it now? $29.95 a week for Awesemo Plus. Awesemo Plus as well. If you want the NBA weekly package, the $16.95, the $4.95 NBA weekly express package gives you full Awesemo Plus access to the NBA Showdown and single game contest, but really across the board, $29.95. Now, we do have something for you as far as Awesemo Plus Platinum. Just to give you this, and we'll tell you about it again throughout the show here, but our code is NBA Strategy Show. It's all one word, all caps. It's the name of this show. So you're here, you're listening, you're watching, you know the name, NBA Strategy Show, and that's going to give you 15% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So you can take Awesemo Plus to Awesemo Plus Platinum and truly maximize everything. And it's great to use all of the tools that you can use to accompany what you're hearing and watching with us today, and really across the board here. All right, so let's look, Alex, at the top. I'm mentioning, of course, the strategy, and I love it as far as to look at the late game and try and take advantage of the time in between the two. But starting at the top here with Milwaukee at home, Brooklyn, still a little bit, and everything at Odd Shopper, we always tell you to go Odd Shopper is the best place. All of the work is done for you. It's still a little bit, I know it's tight, but I would think it's a little on the disrespectful side for Milwaukee to come out and win that game, beat Brooklyn, and getting 2 points at home. So take that as far as the backdrop with the narrative, the expectations of Giannis, Durant, I imagine too. Kyrie Irving, though, I'm interested to see where his ownership lies now that we have that second game with Paul and Booker in the backcourt. Let's start with Kyrie, knowing that Giannis and KD are going to be heavily owned or at least more chalk. Where are you looking at Kyrie today as far as working him in lineups?
To be honest, Kyrie has been kind of baffling me a little bit because, I mean, you'd think without Harden, he'd be getting a ton of assists, he'd be getting a ton of usage, but it hasn't been the case quite as much as you might expect. So it looks like I gotta update these numbers, but his playoffs usage is around 25, which is down from his season usage of 30. And his playoff assist percentage is around 15, down from 27 over the year. So I have to admit, I'm pretty perplexed by that. But I guess maybe they're just playing a lot more like ISO ball, and Kevin Durant is obviously taking a lot of shots, has the ball in his hand a lot. But because this doesn't make any sense to me, I'm kind of betting on a Kyrie bounce back here where his stats should level off to what we saw throughout the season. And I feel like with no Harden, he's primed to put up a big performance.
It's not a huge slate. We have the two games, so I'm not sure how much 9,300 on DK is even a deterrent for you. And look, the difference in ownership will get closer and closer to the 3 o'clock Eastern tip here, but there's a significant difference in cost. Let's say if you're working Chris Paul in that slot and Kyrie at the 1, I know you can move Kyrie on DraftKings, which helps. Even Booker, though, significantly. So Kyrie can work at the 1 or 2 slot, and you have Paul or Booker locked in at both of those, either technically, but both are cheaper in Booker and Paul, yet the ownership is going to be either the same with Irving and Booker or a little bit higher with Paul. Is there any maneuverability in there to where you think the cost or maybe the equal ownership with Irving and Booker could be a deterrent to maybe stay away from Kyrie Irving?
I don't think I think there's some great options in the upper tier. The really tough thing is going to be finding the value pieces to complete this lineup. If you go for too many top end guys, because like with an elimination game in the second game, and then with Milwaukee kind of shortening up their rotation, it's really hard to find like really cheap guys today that you can have any confidence in. But that being said, I do feel like Kyrie is a guy that you should prioritize today. Like you were saying, he's not the highest owned of the studs. And like I feel like his stats throughout the playoffs, like because he's been kind of cold, he isn't going to be as popular as he might be otherwise.
Flip side to that would be people trying to pivot off of Irving to Drew Holiday. And I get it. There's going to be metrics, I'm sure. There's going to be data, there's cost. But first off, what jumps out at me is how high owned he is because of how obvious of a pivot he is at that position, the 1-2 with Holiday. But even after the win last time, disappointing, high owned across the tournament. So maybe that was something to help people out just to kind of mitigate the damage. But I don't know, Alex, I have a hard time trusting Drew Holiday, especially because he's so high owned. I would think maybe if he were less owned and he were below both Irving and Booker, it would be easier to get to him. But I am concerned about trusting him. And then maybe the high ownership factors into that as well, as kind of not fading him entirely, but not getting to him as much.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why he's so high owned is pretty legit. He played 45 and a half minutes last game in regulation, which is pretty much unheard of. Like, so like you couple that with his price tag of 7,200 on DraftKings, and he's looking like a pretty appealing play.
Is the ownership not a concern, though, that everybody else is going to kind of rush to him?
It's definitely a concern. But he is one of the better plays on the slate, and that $7,200 price tag it does seem like it's not going to really make it that hard to finish your lineup. So this is where I kind of pull up the boom bust tool on the site, and I'm kind of looking at the probabilities. So
I mean, he's high right there, number 2 for us, or for you and for us.
yeah, I mean, he has his ownership is 41, and his chance of being the optimal is 43 on our first run. So I do feel like I think he's a guy that you can take some stabs on.
Giannis, I mean, you want to look at the guy who's above him and across the board. Same thing, I guess, kind of with Durant, Alex. How do you approach these top 2 guys, the only guys on the slate, right, including Jokic, who are like the only guys on the slate right now who are, no, I was looking at that one game, sorry. But the only guys in that game, at least, above 10K, we talked about Kyrie and kind of working him in. Jokic, the only guy, the third guy, pardon me, that's above 10K across the board. So we'll get to him a little bit later. But even still, with Giannis workable in the 4 spot, how do you approach, exposure, knowing that Giannis and Durant are going to be out there pretty much? We've seen even in convincing games, both of these guys stay out there for a little more of an extended period of time because it's the playoffs. So is there any concern or any deterrent you have for heavy rostering of both Giannis and Durant?
I mean, there's nothing really to be concerned about other than the fact it's just really hard to build a lineup today. If you go for too many high priced guys, I mean, Giannis, he played 43 minutes in the last game, so like really the sky's the ceiling for him. And I mean, I feel like Milwaukee is kind of in do or die because they don't want to give up a 3-1 lead going into an away game. So I think Giannis, he does look like kind of the top stud of the slate. But I mean, Katie is also excellent.
Yeah, just crunching a couple of lineups here with both of those guys locked in. I mean, the obvious is that you're not going to get to Jokic, clear, and you're not going to get to, it looks like, Kyrie Irving at all. And you're going to be working guys around, and especially in this early game, Mike James, who definitely was disappointing last game as far as the expectations of it. But if you were looking for, and this is just not only in the lineup here as far as locking in KD and Giannis, but it also brings up Brook Lopez as an interesting, really cheap pivot option at the 5 spot. Alex, are you interested in all in getting to Brook Lopez today?
Yeah. I mean, Brook Lopez, he's kind of that guy that'll make your lineup click today because he's relatively cheap, 4,400, and you can count on the minutes. He played about low 30s last time, so pretty consistent minutes every single game. And I mean, he's not a bad fantasy producer, a little worse than a point a minute. So he's really the guy that stands out as a safe option on a day where there aren't a ton of low price safe options.
Yeah, and just trying to find Milwaukee, looking at Drew Holiday clearly is going to be up there with the expectations, the minutes, but I don't know if we can completely ignore I don't know if you would call it a bounce back or just like a revival. I thought the man might need, some sort of resuscitation on the floor or something there. I mean, Chris Middleton was all but forgot. He was a ghost for the first 2 games and then comes back in resounding fact. Look, the price tag as well for him on DK is beyond workable. I mean, you're talking about right in the same realm there with Drew Holiday, and at 7,600 on DK, only about 400 more. If we're talking about Holiday being such a great value, especially because of minutes played and cost, I would think Chris Middleton also falls right in there in this early game because at the very least, the momentum that he rides from last game.
Yeah, I mean, 7,600 for a guy that is a pretty good scorer, and he's playing 40 minutes a game, basically, like at least based on his rotations in the last few. It's pretty hard to poke holes in that. I do feel like maybe his scoring has been a little bit higher than expected. And what I'm seeing here is on the year, his assist rate is 23%. In the playoffs is 14%. His usage is up 2 from his season to date usage. And what that means is he's been getting the ball less because combined those numbers kind of show his assist rate is way down and his usage is just a little bit up. So my conclusion is kind of that he's probably going to level off in both of those categories and be a little bit under where he was for the season. So I do feel like he's been getting a little bit lucky in his fantasy scoring. And 7,600 is a reasonable price tag for him, even despite that. But I'm a little bit worried that everyone's going to have a little bit too high of expectations for Chris Middleton and just slam him in lineups today.
Fair enough. And that may be options then as far as in front of people to maybe move away from that obvious pivots, but also just trying to work cheaper guys in the lineup. And we talked about Brook Lopez, 4,400, clearly an appealing number, but I do see, and I imagine a lot of this is because he's cheap and he's going to be on the floor, and you kind of hope and kind of cross your fingers that PJ Tucker can get you something. But but he seems to be a very workable piece on a lot of the crunch lineups, from our own Awesemo projections to even some high ceiling projections. And again, I think most of that, I defer to you, has to do with the fact that you're paying 3,200 on DK for him. and he's going to be out there unless KD's bodyguard steps in again, which I'm told he won't be there today.
Yeah, so man, PJ Tucker is a guy that like you're really hoping the other guys in your lineup win it for you. Obviously, if you have PJ
Right.
Tucker, but on a 2-game playoff slate, that is a realistic possibility that PJ Tucker is just kind of the highest scoring cheap guy. So I do feel like he's worth he's not a guy that if I end up with 3,100 left and I'm or 3,200 and I need a cheap guy, then PJ Tucker does make a lot of sense.
Is there anybody else? I mean, Bryn Forbes, we kind of, I made the joke about Bryn Forbes earlier. And then I saw the chat like, whoa, 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 whoa. We actually need to know about Bryn Forbes today. And Odd Shopper, if you should be going, if you're not, then my goodness, you're making a major mistake because we keep telling you about this each and every show. There is an interesting prop that jumped out, and our X win percentage is 76% that it goes over. So, Odd Shopper, and a lot of people who are paying attention projections as well. Bryn Forbes is sitting at 8.5 points. So it's kind of a combo question to you, Alex. How much do you like that, especially knowing that our own Odd Shopper has a pretty, I mean, you're over 0.75% right now on our X win percentage that this thing goes over. So at the very least, from minute projection to fantasy projection, and working his cost on the slate, Bryn Forbes, I think, becomes at the very least a realistic option.
He is, yeah, with Dante DiVincenzo out for the playoffs. I think it's just going to be whoever's playing the best of the remaining guys for who gets the minutes. So if Bryn Forbes is having himself a game, then it wouldn't be a shocker to see him close over PJ Tucker. So I do feel like he is a guy that has some upside.
3,700 too on DraftKings, and you know the boom percentage we have is very low because he doesn't have minutes. That's just, it's not like he has this carved out spot like you said. It's going to be who's hot, and it's going to be kind of feeling momentum. Game flow and narrative have a lot to do with it at that point as well, where if it's super tight and he misses a couple of shots, that could be it. Could get yanked versus maybe they're down 14, 18 points, which we've seen before in this series. So that's not unheard of as well. But at the same time, you know, looking at the optimal lineup, it's not a terrible number overall. I just think if you're looking at working guys in, yes, I understand he's $500 more expensive than Tucker. But if you're looking to work somebody in, you know, Forbes, with the hope, again, of somebody just having to go out there and perform, is highly workable as that cheaper option. Again, I'm not pushing, I'm not racing to get to Bryn Forbes today, right? We're not looking to jam him in first and then build a lineup around him, just to be clear.
Right, of course, yeah. But you need to make some moves to win a tournament on these slates, because if you just go with the obvious guys, it's gonna get you a split. So it's not the craziest to go to Bryn Forbes. I don't love that price tag of 3,700, and there's probably some better bets you can make, but not someone I'd be disappointed to see in my lineup.
37, is it too high for you? You said you don't love it.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't accomplish the goal of like really stacking the rest of your lineup like some of the other options do. So I kind of prefer PJ Tucker at 3,200, but I think the ownership's going to reflect that too.
So looking at this on the flip side here, we talked about Kyrie and Kevin Durant, but you start to open up other areas and other avenues. Jeff Green, first and foremost, let's just approach Jeff Green. Let's assume that Jeff Green is playing, questionable, we know, but even so, rostering Jeff Green is a little concerning for me, Alex, just because he may come out and look great, but still set on a minutes restriction just because his first game back since round one and that injury.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough to know what's happening with Jeff Green. There's not a lot of reporting on it. It says strained left foot. So, I mean, if it's been severe enough to keep him out for a couple of weeks, he hasn't played since May 22nd. So that's like 3 weeks ago, or May 26th, sorry. Anyway, it might be a situation where you can't play like 20 minutes coming off that. So it is a spot where you're kind of limited on the upside, but he is 3K, so
Yes, you read my
that that,
mind.
that does help a lot. And
Well,
it's
think about it, right? He's 3K. So we talked about some other options like Forbes. Lopez will set aside, but really PJ Tucker and Forbes. The only difference I'm thinking here, Alex, out loud, is the minutes. Like, if Forbes is playing well, there's still minutes for him. If PJ Tucker is playing well, there's still minutes for him. But with Green, he could be out there for 18 minutes. He's still a better basketball player than both of those two guys. So that's where you kind of wager and kind of have to balance the two, knowing that the cost now makes Jeff Green, to your point, actually more playable than I gave him credit for in the first place. I stand corrected.
Yeah, definitely. Jeff Green, if he's in, if we get that news, I think he's someone that is worth taking some shots on.
Where do you think we have to start being careful on minutes that get taken away? I mean, he's up front, so I don't know how much Nick Claxton, who's been a great option, cheap option to get some good minutes and productivity out of it. Even Blake Griffin, somebody else who we've been counting on to play a lot of minutes at that 4 or small 5, depending on what they do. So I wonder if at all, and we're assuming, Alex, that Jeff Green is playing for the purposes right now of this convo, if at all that impacts maybe even other minutes in the rotation. We'll talk about Joe Harris, but where guys you think now become a little bit more dicey, because even if it's 6 to 8 minutes of their time that gets cut as a result of Jeff Green playing.
Oh yeah, there's a few guys that I'm worried might have their minutes pinched if Jeff Green plays. So the obvious ones are Blake Griffin and Nick Claxton, where they have liked to go to Jeff Green as center at points during the season, and Brook Lopez is a guy that he plays pretty far from the basket. So putting Jeff Green out against Brook Lopez does make sense. I don't know if they'd really prioritize Green over Griffin, but Claxton certainly could see fewer minutes. So he's a guy that I'm not going to take that many shots on if Jeff Green plays. The other spot I feel like guys that could lose minutes if Jeff Green plays are Bruce Brown and Mike James, because versus Giannis at power forward for Milwaukee, there is a good chance they want to get a bigger lineup out there. So the easiest way to do that is you take away these guys that are kind of the point guards, because they have Kyrie. They don't really need these guys out there. They can easily put in a guy for defensive purposes like Jeff Green.
You are in a tournament today, right? England scored, just to let you know.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, just wanted to update you. Look, I don't have any eyes. There's no major wager that I have. There's no 10-unit bet that I have on England. So don't worry about me. I'm just focusing on the NBA strategy show. For your benefit, for the purposes of your tournament, Alex, I was reminding you.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of guys watching maybe woke up early, got a few lineups in. So
Absolutely.
I have no idea if that helps or hurts me. And hopefully it's a good game. Hopefully everything goes well today, because yesterday, a little bit of a scary day in the soccer world.
Yes, absolutely. But it looks like everything as good as it can be at the moment now, moving forward. But very true. I'm curious about Joe Harris, just in general. He seems to be a guy that is, when working, we've seen this offense, especially without James Harden, there's opportunity for a shooter to get points and to get points in volume, especially how fast and how well this team, unselfishly, I may add, moves the basketball. But at the same time, you have to factor in price and you have to factor in the rest of the slate. 4,500 on DraftKings. I thought he might be a little bit higher, but 4,500 on the surface, Alex, looks workable. And he is coming up in some crunch lineups, especially on FanDuel, working him down in that small forward spot. But looking at across, and that 4,500 part of me was on FanDuel, just to be clear. But looking at Joe Harris specifically, both individually and kind of in comparison to the slate, can you get to a Joe Harris a lot? 5,500, which is more like it on DraftKings. Now that seems high.
Right. Yeah, he's expensive for the kind of player he is. A good shooter, but doesn't really contribute a lot, and his usage hasn't been that high in the playoffs, only 14.6%. So he's not even shooting a lot. So he seems like a guy that I feel like could be convenient for building a lineup because he's not expensive, but I feel like you can kind of get a better lineup, get going a little bit more stars and scrubs.
Mike James, you mentioned. How about just on an individual standpoint? Disappointing last game, but look, the minutes should be there. Him being on the floor should still be there, and his roster or his salary is always going to be workable. Is there at what 3,900 now, so just under 4K on DK? Are you getting to a lot of Mike James in your lineups?
That one's going to depend on whether Jeff Green plays or not for me a little bit, because I do feel like Mike James is kind of the last man in the rotation a little bit. So I feel like if they bring in Jeff Green, that could easily mean Mike James isn't going to play a ton. And we saw it in the last game as well. Mike James only played 12 minutes, so that kind of showed he was deprioritizing that game. So I'm a little bit worried that as we get closer and closer to this playoff series being finished, he's going to get his minutes scaled back. But if Jeff Green is out, then it's pretty much one step closer he is to getting significant runs. So then I might go to him as a value option.
Real quick, as we transition into the second game and then start to use what we've laid out on the first game as far as in comparison to the slate overall, I am curious. And a lot of this is predicated on Jeff Green. So let's just look now on the hypothetical for the last couple of minutes here as we close the first game down. Let's look at this hypothetical that Jeff Green is out, that he's questionable, game time decision, the foot isn't where they want it to be. He's out. I imagine Nick Claxton now remains a pretty good low-cost option, 3,400 on DraftKings. A lot of chatter on the chat about Landry Shamet and whether or not his minutes are secure. So looking at these low-cost options for Brooklyn, anybody in the Claxton or Shamet category jump out at you?
Yeah, Claxton, he seems like a guy that if Jeff Green is out, then he's pretty safe to get somewhere in the mid-teens, and he's really cheap. So I think he could be a guy to go to. And then Mike James, cheap as well. I think he's an option. Bruce Brown would look like a fantastic option at 4,700. Played huge minutes last game, like 38 minutes. Hasn't always gotten that kind of run, but it does show that kind of in the most recent game they thought he was the best option. So
he did, at least.
That's right. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, like what you're saying is a good point where he kind of lost the game for them. So that could be a reason he plays last minutes. So,
or maybe they freeze him out. Maybe it's like, yo, I'm open. KD, I'm open. He's like, I'm taking this triple T, man. I know what happened last time. I won't get it back.
That's pretty much what happened every time I played basketball. Is no one would pass me the ball. So I can relate to that. But I think, the fact that Bruce Brown had a rough end of the game, that could affect his minutes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting narrative because I think it's complicated. And it's not like one of these things where the media tells you playoff Paul doesn't exist and Paul George sucks. And then from a DFS standpoint, you're like, wait a second, that's not necessarily the case. And real life narrative doesn't meet DFS narrative. But in this case, I don't know, or am I going to say, yes, 100% I believe it, but it's enough of an issue for me to where I may not get to as much Brown today, right? I'm not going to fade him entirely. It's not like, okay, they're going to freeze him out. We joke about that. But yeah, I think human nature does set in now where I'm sure he was told by Steve Nash, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Alex Baker, Eitan Shander, Jordan, everybody, dude, stop doing that shit. So yeah, maybe there is. And here's what I would say is maybe it's just a slow start for Brown. Maybe a look that he normally would take, he gives up. That's all I'm saying is you have to, it's not often we get to do this, right? Factor in the human element / narrative to it. But I think there could be something there by all means.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, I think the most obvious thing is the coach might be on the coach's bad side now, and there's
Yeah.
plenty of guys that are around Bruce Brown's skill level on the team. So it really will be like up to the coach and how well Bruce Brown's playing, how many minutes he goes. So that could be a good reason to pivot. I think if Bruce Brown is deprioritized, maybe Mike James plays a little bit more. So uh, that'll be an interesting one to watch.
So we move to the second game here, and we've already explained as far as Giannis, Kevin Durant, the two guys above 10K on the slate. There's another one in Jokic, Kyrie Irving, as far as how frustrating it can get, but also working the usage and looking at the bounce back opportunities. So we'll start with Jokic, but there are a couple of interesting angles here from simply the health of Michael Porter Jr. and the return of Will Barton now in this lineup and messing everything else up for other guys. Let's start with the obvious, though, Jokic. We know we have two other guys here that are 10K. So I'll phrase it this way on DraftKings 10K plus, of course. If you were looking at getting to two of the three in an optimal lineup today, Kevin Durant, Giannis, and now we add Jokic into the fold, Alex, which two are you getting to the most?
Man, that's a good question. I think that I mean, Brook Lopez is such a extremely obvious play at at center that it's going to be a little bit harder to get to Jokic. So for that reason, like maybe I'd go with the other two just because we get that value play. But I do feel like Jokic certainly. I mean, he's a great play today in his own right, where he's coming off that 30-20-10 game, and none of his other teammates really did much. So, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious to go to him.
Is there this is more of a general strategy for you on these shorter slates type question here, Alex, just in case people are newer or they see or hear the term, stars and scrubs a lot being thrown out here. I did crunch a lineup just to see what it gets me, locking in the top three guys in Jokic, Giannis, and KD. And it's workable in the sense of Bryn Forbes, Brook Lopez, PJ Tucker. These guys come in now on this lineup. Austin Rivers is another one, and we can talk about him specifically at 3,600 on DK, and then Pat Connaughton right there at the bottom. Point being is that is this a viable strategy where you see two games on the slate, something in this case, and there are clearly the three guys that are going to be high owned, chalk play from a standpoint of what is expected, but at the same time, you also are locking in guaranteed to some extent productivity, and the likelihood of one or two of these guys going for 70 is actually pretty good.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So one way you could approach it is just play the ownership. So if Jokic is looking a little low owned, then maybe go to him a little bit more. So that's going to be something I'm paying a lot of attention to going up to lock.
Now let's look at, as mentioned, the other factors here. Michael Porter Jr., the cost is reflecting, I think, the concern, to say the least, but it's a back injury, man. And these things just don't magically get fixed. I don't care how many cortisone shots or any other type of massages, it doesn't matter. Like, that's a back. And you saw how visibly painful it was for him. So with all of that said, but also kind of factoring in the cost here, how do you approach Michael Porter Jr. on this slate?
Yeah,
6,300 on DK.
That's all like two really conflicting things where like one, it's an elimination game, so they might play as many minutes as they physically can. The other is like they're gonna have 4 elimination games in a row if everything goes according to plan. So maybe they do like slow him down a little bit because of the back. He hasn't played as big minutes in the last few as he had been um, towards the end of the season. So last game he played about 30. The game before that, 28. So it's not like he's playing high 30s in minutes. Although I do feel like that is a possible thing tonight with it being an elimination game. So I'm a little bit torn. I do think he's pretty cheap at 6,300. Fits pretty nicely. So I think he's a good option.
28.8. So this thing's going to rise at, or maybe drop, depending on how we get closer to lock by all means. And look, the main slate ownership projections, part of the boom bust tools that we use as well. Everything that's available to you. It's $29.95 a week for Awesemo Plus. It really is easy. It's cheap. It's affordable, and you get everything in front of you, especially when you're watching what we're doing here, listening to Alex and kind of how his mind works approaching the slate. You have everything in front of you as well. So this should be work. We're making you money. This shouldn't be easy where you just pop in and say, hey, Alex, give me the best play on the slate. Like, we want you to use all of these tools. And the good thing is you don't have to do the research to provide the numbers on here. Alex and company have already done that, but it helps to have everything alongside as we go through the slates really across the board. Now, as far as making money, and as far as we gave you that other prop, I love this one for Kyrie Irving, and it's over 3.5. Actually, the total is 3.5 3-pointers made. Saw that on Odd Shopper. Again, go back. Everything is done for you there. The best odds. It's all shopped, no pun intended, there for you on Odd Shopper, and you can get the best on both sides. So if it's an over and you want to get the best value, or if it's team and you want to get the best value, even a player prop in the case of Kyrie Irving. And it's all juice to the over. He had that one game where he was launching the threes, even though they were up 30. But other than that, I think even still, he can put up a really good game today and make people money in DFS. But I'm still going under 3.5 3-pointers made today for Kyrie Irving, Alex.
I like it.
All right. Now, the beauty of No House Advantage, who sponsors our show today, and I brought that up because we always deal with injury. We deal with concern. Is Mike Conley going to play? Is Jeff Green going to play? Well, that's why we tell you about No House Advantage, our sponsor today, where you can take advantage of player prop offerings across the board. NBA is in full effect, MLB, PGA, the NFL right around the corner. You want to get used to using No House Advantage now and continue to take full advantage of lines and projections and everything that's locked in. We see this all the time. We gave you this example the other day with Mike Conley and how questionable he was leading up to tip, and then he's ruled out. Well, what happens? The books adjust. Guess who doesn't? No House Advantage. So any projections for Joe Ingles, for example, are set with the belief that Mike Conley is going to play. Once he's ruled out, you see favorable lines that haven't adjusted at all on No House Advantage. That's the place to go. Over 500 player props. And guess what? As always, we have a promo code for you. Use Awesemo, and you'll get a $20 match for your first deposit. It's where I go. I tell you all the time, it's where I go for player props. Went 4-1 last night off of No House Advantage projections, Alex. The one that I missed, and look, what can you do? Reggie Jackson going off and knocking down, 10 threes in the first quarter. So I faded him on threes, but everything else hits, and it was just based off of the No House Advantage projections. I'm telling you, nice. It's an easy way to make money. We love it. We love it.
Yeah, I see some pretty good props tonight, so it should be an easy one.
Yeah, I was looking at as well, just kind of building it up. We talked about Forbes and Kyrie, but again, the beauty of No House Advantage is you are going to get a lot of the books won't have lesser name guys where you can get or just take action on. So sometimes, like you won't get an Austin Rivers points, rebounds, and assists on a lot of books, but at No House Advantage, you will. So that's where I think you could take full opportunity here. Blake Griffin, for example, is the set at 7.5 rebounds on NHA. We have him projected at 5.6. I mean, that's 86.63% that smashes under right there.
Nice.
Right? Now, I guarantee you the books have him at 7.5, right? Or something pardon me. I guarantee you the books have him at 5.5 right there to make it really difficult, whereas NHA has it at 7.5. All right, so let's look at Will Barton. Will Barton comes back. There was some concern about minutes. He played well. He's playing well. I think we start to factor Will Barton in now as a guy who can get you mid to high 20s, if not 30 minutes today.
Yeah, this is the spot where I'm kind of looking to take a shot on Denver. Now, Austin Rivers and Campazzo have been starting, but Campazzo saw his minutes go down a lot in the last game due to not playing as well as some of the other guys. So with this being an elimination game and Will Barton kind of ramping up, I'm kind of thinking that if everyone's thinking Rivers and Campazzo are going to start again, I might build some lineups assuming that Barton and Monty Morris will slide into the starting lineup today. They throughout the season have been more heavily relied upon, so it's not that big a stretch. And in the last game, we saw those two guys were out there for the last part of the game. So I'm kind of anticipating there's a pretty good chance we'll see a different starting lineup today.
5K for Will Barton. Monty Morris is another great one there, just a little higher at 5,300. Does the price for Barton, I'm okay with 5K because of the expectations and the fact that clearly, as you mentioned in the elimination game, we're going to see a lot of him. Is 5,300 though? Does that get a little too much for Monty Morris? We are on the 2-game slate. I get that, but that number seemed a little high on DK for Morris.
Definitely, it is quite high. So it's more of a contrarian play where you're hoping he's not super high owned. So that's when the guy that you might pick to try to get that one guy no one else has. So let me look at the ownership real quick because everyone is kind of having to pay this expensive price. It looks like Monty Morris is at
Super low
10%.
owned. Yeah.
Barton is at about 20%. So not the lowest owned, but Monty Morris is probably one of the lower owned guys that has a good shot tonight.
Yeah. Speaking of which, just to go back to ownership real quick, Michael Porter Jr. just under 30%. Does he get, I'm just curious about the injury, does he get to a point where he might be too high owned and the risk of his injury just is not worth it?
If he was like the highest owned on the slate, I would think about that, but 27% isn't egregious. So it is an elimination game. I'm sure he's going to be gritting it out.
Campazzo and Gordon are going to be the two guys kind of in that meat of the 4K, 4,300 for the guard, 4,900 for Gordon. And there's a great prop, by the way, on Odd Shopper that we'll get to in a second here, speaking of Campazzo. But I guess so much of this is the starting lineup, right? So much of this is what they come out with. Now, if we're looking at Campazzo, for example, starting, as opposed to what you mentioned, the scenario where you could get Barton and Morris out there in the elimination standpoint at 4,300 on DK with the expected minutes seems like a pretty smart play to me. But then again, I'm not winning 100K by just closing my eyes and winning in soccer like you. So I defer to you, sir.
Yeah, I think if he's starting kind of like he has been, then he's a good play at 4,300. Be ready to make some adjustments if this Denver Nuggets lineup looks a little different than it has been.
You're not going to run with him much at all if he's not starting.
No, especially after last game, he only played like 17 minutes. So that was way down from the previous few. But it also coincides with Barton kind of playing more minutes. So it's kind of apparent to me that whoever's playing better between Rivers and Campazzo is probably going to get the minutes. And then Barton will probably get it's between those three guys. So I feel like Barton is taking minutes away from Campazzo or Rivers, depending on who's playing worse.
We can't trust Aaron Gordon, right? He's coming off a PJ Tucker game, 36 minutes, 7 fantasy points. Come on, Alex.
Oh, he had a rare 4-4-4-4 game. 4 points, 4 rebounds, 4 turnovers, and 4 personal fouls. So
that's hard.
Yeah, it wouldn't be shocking if he played less minutes today. Like the weird thing is that kind of coincided with his biggest minutes of the postseason, so that made no sense. But everyone on the team was playing. I guess so. I was thinking of the previous game where they got blown out, but this past game, Gordon he had a rough outing and didn't get the minutes. He got huge minutes, so I'm.
Oh, you're right. The last game he did have the 4-4. To paraphrase Moses Malone, the faux.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty impressive. Even if we can't to capitalize in fantasy. But the guy who could benefit if Gordon, they're just sick of him not performing, would be JaMychal Green. So
Nice.
I don't hate taking a shot on Green, but it looks like he's not particularly cheap either.
All right, we're going to spend a nice chunk here on Phoenix and looking at Booker, Paul, and Ayton as far as the slate. Green, as well as you mentioned on that final shot there, but also with Bridges and Jay Crowder. So there's some names that we have to look at and get to here. But to remind you, and I know a lot of people when they see the one game slate think, hey, this is a great chance to get in to the Awesemo Hall of Fame. You need to do it where there aren't all these ties, and it's not like you and 1,050 other people that finish first. But here's the good news: is every single day, and I know Alex, you and I, we both woke up to a tweet from Charlie saying, hey, you guys, you did it again. I listened to everything. I won. I placed top 3. Tweets at Awesemo HOF and is now in the Awesemo Hall of Fame. So this is how you do it. All right. It's very simple. You download the Awesemo profile from awesemo.com/avatar, place in the top 3 of a contest with over 5K contestants, and then tweet the wins at Awesemo HOF. And I told you, Charlie right there had a huge one. And then, you start to go through and look at this. Charlie finishing first on FanDuel, listening to Greg Ehrenberg, Spags, and Terry. Look at that's another small, safe commercial for those 3. God, the guy's listening to Spags and he won money. Super Vash right there with a huge one as well. And speaking of Spags, he's coming up. Look at that. 700. That's a convincing 10K win for MT Barnett. And then I knew it was coming, man. I knew it was coming. Here we go. Spags once again. Boy, this guy's on a nice little heater here. Not a Alex Baker heater, but he's on a nice, midi heater here.
Yeah, he's showing his stuff. You gotta love it.
And then we had Luba 5 with a 3rd place finish there. Nice little victory. It's all you get from listening, following, watching, and just soaking in information and then putting it back into your lineups. Speaking of which, Chris Paul, Devin Booker, short slate. So we know that there's plenty of opportunity to get to both of these guys, 8,100, 7,400, Booker, Paul, respectively. I think the only thing we have to worry about with these 2 guys is ownership, but I don't even know on a 2-game slate how much ownership plays into account for both Paul and Booker, Alex.
Yeah, I think they look like solid options. So there's certainly a lot of guys that you can pivot around in this mid to high range. So Booker has been playing tons of minutes, and Paul has seen his minutes go up a lot over the last 3 since he kind of had that shoulder. So I do think they're some of the more solid guys you can go to today.
If you were looking at pivoting off of one between Booker and Paul, who do you think is the more obvious pivot?
That's a good question. I think I have them about equal, but I feel, I guess maybe Paul could play a few more minutes if it was really necessary, or Booker's already playing kind of the maximum minutes, so maybe there's a little bit more upside in Paul.
Ayton, especially on FanDuel, if you were looking at, and he's coming in on a lot of crunch lineups with our own projections on FanDuel as that center spot. A lot of it because you can roster Giannis, of course, at the 4. So that makes life much easier on FanDuel. But I'm just thinking overall, not just on FanDuel at the center spot, but the cost of DeAndre Ayton is so workable here as a pivot from the top 2 guys without having to go super low in Brook Lopez.
Yeah, I mean, Ayton, he's been really excellent in these playoffs. And the thing I've been most impressed by is his ability to stay on the floor, because most centers aren't able to play like 36 plus minutes a night because it's too hard to not foul people, but he's been able to do that. I do find maybe it's a little bit higher than he'll average, so I'm a little bit hesitant to really give him credit for playing that many minutes, but I think he's a solid play. I mean, as long as he doesn't get in foul trouble, he should be out there.
Bridges, I love, but 5,200, you start to creep up a little bit more. Clearly, I'm not the only one that loves him, and I think the price is reflecting what he can be. I know Jay Crowder becomes interesting at $4,600 or $600 cheaper, who can work in at that 3 spot, at the small forward spot. But Bridges just across the board on the slate at the 3, 5,200. I know on the surface seems a little high, but part of me is like, I don't mind paying that for Bridges if he's worked in a lineup today, an optimal lineup.
Yeah, I mean Bridges, he plays a lot of minutes. He didn't play as many last game, which is kind of concerning. But if we go back to the last 5, he's been playing big minutes. So I think I don't know what happened last game, but I expect him to be out there for his normal run today.
We got 34 minutes from Crowder, and just mentioned as far as, especially if you were looking in that same slot as a little bit of a cheaper pivot from Bridges in the same game, it would be Crowder. But just overall, I mean, Crowder, you can work at the 3, you can work at the 4. So at 4,600, he's not the super low cost 3K plus guy that you want. But as far as minutes are concerned for the price, that seems pretty good on the surface.
Definitely. Yeah, this 4K range is kind of the lowest you can go and still be confident that you guys are going to get big minutes. So Crowder does stand out as one of the safest options for a guy that's cheap.
If you were looking at, I'm going to put you on the spot here, 2 guys to roster in similar cost. Let's assume that your lineup is built with some beefy guys and you've got 4,700 laying around here to roster your final guy. At the 3 spot, are you looking at Bruce Brown, who we talked about earlier, or are you looking at Jay Crowder now in that spot?
You kind of talked me off Bruce Brown a little bit, but man, it's so hard to fade
Dude,
Brown based on
you have no idea. Like, I just want the chat to know something. If Bruce Brown goes for 65 points today, you ain't gonna see me on this channel anymore.
I don't know, man. Like it's tough to win anyway. So if I lose because I don't have Bruce Brown as much, I'm willing to accept
that. I love it. Well, yeah. Look at this gigantic super chat that we got from Super Vash here as we're winding down. Look at this. Woke up Saturday morning, opened the FanDuel app only to check to see if Denver lost. Thought my entries were done. Actually won $100K. Only did 4 entries using the lineup builder tool, thanks to Alex Aton and the rest of the crew. Holy shit, man.
That is impressive. Winning $100K right now when it's 2-game slates, like, mad props to Super Vash, and thanks for the support.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I mean, look, let's just throw a couple of 3K guys in here, but that might be the best way to end any show right there. Just as far as, campaign, we talked about Campazzo there a little bit. JaMychal Green, as far as on Denver is concerned, Millsap, Torrey Craig, any of these guys at super low cost jump out, especially if somebody's working in a show. I know we didn't talk a lot about the showdown mode today with the 2 games, but if you are trying to work in a bunch of guys that are high owned, but really across the board on the 2-game slate as well, can you get to any of these guys at the end? Saric, I wouldn't, only because Ayton would pretty much have to be in foul trouble.
Yeah, actually, that's funny because I was going to say Saric because Ayton could get in foul trouble.
I'm done. You tell me what to do, okay? Because I feel terrible talking you out of probably great plays now.
So the guys that I feel like have upside on the bench are Cam Johnson, who, if he plays, he can outplay either Bridges or Crowder and get those minutes, or Saric, who benefits from foul trouble. Saric and Ayton have combined for 48 minutes in the last 3 games. So do you feel pretty confident that if for whatever reason Ayton picks up some fouls, Saric could play a lot more minutes?
Awesome, brother. Thank you. Thank you for the knowledge. Thank you for the insight. Man, I am fading Bruce Brown as hard as humanly possible across the board. I just want to have a job tomorrow.
That's why, like, making a hot takes that can be a risky business. But
I know.
I think you're onto something with Bruce Brown because, man, like, I'm sure, like, based on how pissed everyone was on Twitter, like, the coach must have been like so much worse.
I love it, man. Make sure you're following Alex on Twitter at Awesemo DFS. Make sure you're following us across the board at Awesemo, NBA as well. Jordan, thank you, sir. Another fantastic job producing the show. Live before lock MLB version coming up next with EMAC and Max. We'll see if we can pry Max away from watching his golf picks. I saw him tweeting all over the place. Alex, thank you, sir. And we'll do it all again soon. When are you back for everybody to know as far as anything is concerned?
I'm always behind the scenes. I'm not sure when the next show is, to be honest.
But you're definitely reachable. We know that.
Yeah.
All right. Enjoy the games, everybody. Thanks for hanging. Thanks for watching. And leave us a like. Make sure you're subscribed and enjoy your day.